Welcome to Chat TPT, a podcast about music business from the unique perspective of content creators in the trumpet community. We are so excited to have you here with us today as we dive into the world of trumpet playing, content creation, and everything in between. We hope that you'll find a supportive and inclusive space with us where musicians from all backgrounds can learn, collaborate, and support one another.
There we go. Recording is in progress, so we can be unhinged.
I'm always unhinged. That's the trick. That is,
Oh, wow. I'm glad you said that because I'm very similar. I tell people that, I get the comments and it's really sweet and I'm really grateful for it. People are like, oh yeah, you're so nice, blah, blah, blah. And it's great. I love it. I mean, thank you for everyone who's so kind to me. But I really just don't filter what's on my mind. And so if I feel like there's something positive about the world, I'm going to call it out every time I get the chance, because there isn't always something positive in the world. And I'm not going to hide things or, be ashamed of things. I'm going to call things out. It's a little bit a part of trying to, even the score is not the right word, but to advocate for yourself, right? Like when there are things that are happening that are beyond your control, especially things that are lopsided in somebody else's favor and not yours. You whether we like it or not, we kind of have an obligation to just kind of say, hey, listen, this is unacceptable. So yeah, I give all of my positive thoughts so that I have the ability to be a little bit unhinged when I give all of the negative thoughts. Like, just so you know, I'm not doing this because I'm a jerk. I'm doing this because I'm actually upset, because this is actually unfair or unsafe or whatever.
yeah. I mean, talking about that, like I didn't realize like my entire life I was masking, and I've stopped doing that, and I'm like, oh man, like, first of all, it saves so much energy. Second of all, I'm like, oh, this is how I really feel. Let's go. But I was gonna say, like, today we're gonna talk about sort of like the unfair, the more annoying parts, the things that weigh us down as musicians and as entertainers in general, because we're not just musicians when we're on stage. Our personality is also we're performers. Everything about what we do is performing and interacting with an audience. And so I get really frustrated when people don't treat performers as humans. They're like, oh, it's just a person, it's just a performer up there. Like they're not a real person. They're not, they don't have feelings. They don't, I mean, people don't think about that, but the way they act and the way they treat us is very reflective of that kind of thinking. And the second last day, I'm going to talk about my dragon butt journey. The second last day of our carnival, I was in the dragon butt, so we were alternating back and forth. And there was like another employee that, first of all, like I asked my supervisor to like double check the tail, make sure everything was like even. And then, we start the parade and we start going, and I feel someone like touching my butt. And I'm like, I'm basically in a blanket. I can't see anything. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, who is that? And this is like another employee, and they're like, oh, I'm just fixing the tail of the dragon. And I'm like, oh, can you please like not touch my butt? And then they did it again, and they were like, I'm not touching your butt, I'm touching the dragon's butt. And I'm like, literally in such a vulnerable position in this costume. I can't see anything. I can barely breathe. I can't do anything. And you're going around like touching me, first of all, without asking. And that same day we had kids coming up and like shaking the dragon's head. Like we can't see out of it. And so the person that was in the dragon's head was like, I don't know what to do. Like because as our job as performers, we're not allowed to break character. We're not allowed to break character, and we're not allowed to yell at people. Basically, we're just supposed to accept it. And so why are people allowed to just act so terribly towards us? Crazy. I hate people. I don't hate people. I love people, but I hate the way people treat me.
I understand the feeling, right? It's like you you hate not being able to trust people, right? That's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to. And, not knowing if you run into someone who has complete integrity or someone who has no moral compass, or someone who is struggling or and might not have the foresight to understand that they're taking it out on you, someone who imposes weaknesses or choices upon you. I don't believe that people are inherently bad. However, we do make actions and decisions, and out of hurt, out of anger, out of jealousy, out of pain, out of any sort of drought of emotions. That there are tons of reasons, and oftentimes we don't think about it. I don't want to go as far as to say that I'm glad that you shared the story that you did. I'm happy that you brought it out in the context of here's a real life example, right? Because it's very easy to you can assume on social media, on content creation, we're content creators, of course. It's obviously an issue. Like, content creators aren't always treated like humans on the content creation space. But this isn't exclusively what we're talking about. And your example makes it very clear that's not exclusively what we're talking about, right? This is a problem for musicians, and depending on what job you're in. I mean, of course, if you're at a fair or an amusement park or something of the sort, anything that involves you, um, giving of your time and your energy to a company that serves children, that serves adults who have children minds, sometimes even adults with adult minds, right? Because you kind of listed examples of all of them. um, it it puts you in a position where you're not necessarily fully safe. um, I think that's it's really sad. Like, when I hear you tell these stories, like, I think it's ridiculous and outrageous. I really, really wish I could be shocked and surprised, like, oh my gosh, who would do that?
Right?
But that's a reality. Like, that's just a reality that we live, and especially, I hate to say it, but specific types of people, specific backgrounds, specific genders, etc. Right? These things just are more common, and they shouldn't be common anywhere. But they especially shouldn't. No one should feel safe and have the right to impose something like that on another human being. Um, and as musicians, I don't know. We there are some instances where, depending on where you're working and what you're doing, you feel like you don't have permission, right?
Mhm.
So I taught private lessons for a while as an independent contractor with a couple companies, but there was one main company. Um, and this is not their fault, and they don't have any responsibility for this overall situation. But when you think about the nature of private lessons, first of all, if we even take out the company, altogether, and we just talk about private lessons in general, right? um, you put yourself in my shoes now, right? um, I am an adult male who works with teenagers, right? I teach them private lessons. I teach them trumpet, and then preteens and et cetera. When I first started, I taught all ages, all backgrounds. You teach lessons too. A lot of our colleagues teach lessons. We have this experience, right? So in the case of teaching in on the grounds of a company or institution, they have a group of obviously small cubicles where you go in and you bring your student in and you teach them for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever their lesson is. So what that means sometimes is that you're in a room alone with a minor, and you understand, hopefully, the gravity of whatever that situation is. But usually those individuals don't. So if you happen to have someone who is fond of you, whether or not they are attracted to you in maybe a less wholesome manner, or whether or not they just like you, in general, they feel comfortable around you, whatever the case may be, you have to constantly be looking out for their safety, with full knowledge that really no one is looking out for your safety, and you don't ever have to do anything wrong in order to get in trouble. And there have been certain instances. So I had a student, and this is literally, we were preparing for all district band. The student had really big confidence issues. She thought she just wasn't capable of achieving anything that she, wanted to, and I feel for students like that. And I work with those students, and a lot of those students, I do a lot of work with affirmations, a lot of work with getting people to see their value. I ask people to, they do a performance, and I usually start with, give me a scale of 1 to 10. A student might come to me and say -6, like, okay, false, try again. Let's be pragmatic about this approach, and let's be very specific. And let's say, okay, it was a 2. So, all right, what were your errors? I messed up this one thing. Oh, you messed up one thing, and it's 2 out of 10, right? So we have those conversations. But this particular student, essentially, she had started taking lessons with me towards the end of the preparation for district band. At that point, it was too late for her to register to audition and those things. And so I kind of asked her why. And she was like, yeah, I just don't think I'm good enough. I was like, oh, well, of course you're good enough. He was like, oh, you're just saying that. No. So anyway, we went through this conversation, and the conversation was essentially like, yeah, I mean, check this out. Your district band audition is 16 measures worth of music. It's like, take one measure. And I think I've told you a little bit about my teaching pedagogy, right? And I like to be specific and mathematic and plan things ahead and turn things out into bite-sized chunks. Like, yeah, maybe you can't leap 20 steps in a day, but you don't have to. Take one step one day and you're there in less than a month, right? And so that was that's a very similar conversation as what I had with her. I told her, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, like 2 measures a day, and you've got essentially done in a week, a week and 1 day, you've got the prepared piece down. And then, go through your 12 major scales, just learn 1 a day. Like, you already know some of them, right? Your concert B flat scale. Oh yes. Your concert E flat scale. Yes. Okay, cool. So that's 2 out the bat, right? So I was going this conversation, and my goal was just to show her that, like, she's capable of doing anything she sets her mind to. But what it turned out into being was, she really wanted to be in district band, and she now realized that she had a chance and had never given herself the chance. So she's sitting there, and as we start talking, and as I start putting things in front of her to start doing sight reading and whatnot, she starts tearing up, right? And she just starts crying and bawling. And I'm like, oh, this wasn't my intention. I'm really sorry. We don't have to talk about this. And she starts crying even harder, right? And she runs up, and well, she doesn't run up, she scoots up next to me, and she wraps her arms around me, right? And that's one of those situations where it's like, I just want to be so compassionate, right? And just be like, I get it, I understand, it's okay, let's have this talk. But me being in my early 20s at the time, and or being in her early teens, and being, perhaps it's a good thing it was in a public place, right? But having a student like that wrap her arms around me in that instance, that's a compromising situation. It's one of those things where it's like, what do I push her away and be completely cold, right? I could even, I mean, depending on the wrong person at the wrong time, could be charged with any number of things, just as a matter of not pushing her away. There's someone burled up in my arms in tears, and someone walks by and they're like, what did you do to that kid? It's a very tough and difficult situation. And I've had a couple situations similar like that as well, but that's the one example that kind of comes into my mind, where like, there are so many instances, right, where as musicians we are not safe. And you may or may not have anyone who is willing to stand up for you or to protect you. And sometimes the laws aren't always in your favor. And what do you do? So yeah, I mean, I think this is it's a great important conversation to have with people who are, first of all, who are musicians, because I mean, like, so many of us have gone through some instance or situation where we haven't felt safe, right? And to know that you're not alone, but two, for anyone who isn't a musician, to really understand, like, yeah, I mean, we do a heck of a lot more than just, quote unquote play, right? Play our instruments around every day. It's not all fun and games. It's very, very difficult. Before we started recording, we was giving a little bit of an unhinged comment about how flipping difficult it is just to pay your bills. And it's not necessarily because you aren't worth it, but it's because the perception of the world, how they see your value. Like, yeah, come out and do these 2 rehearsals, and they're each 8 hours long, and come out and do this performance. and we'll buy you dinner as your payment, right? Or like, oh, you'll meet so many people and you get so many connections. And I think now the exposure thing is a little bit more than more of a meme than anything else, but it's still common enough that like we have to still talk about it. It's unacceptable. Right? Like you wouldn't hire a surgeon and be like, oh, well, this is great exposure. You wouldn't hire a teacher. I don't know, depending on where we're going in America, maybe you would eventually, and say, oh, this is good, this is exposure, I'll buy you dinner for teaching my students. But like that's not acceptable anywhere, and it's certainly not acceptable for a lot of these musicians who have been taught, right? This is kind of a well-tempered, I'm kind of proud of myself for not raising my voice and going into an angry rant, right? But who have been taught that you have to get a doctorate just to be considered in 99% of the fields, right? And you're going to put yourself a minimum of 8 years in college through debt, etc., right? And whether or not you get scholarship money, even if you are a graduate teaching assistant in your graduate school areas, you still have to pay the money for other expenses and rent, etc., right? And a stipend is not enough to take care of those. So we're all taking out loans. You're putting out close to a decade, depending on if you do seek a terminal degree, of your time and effort into a craft. And then you're going out and there are no jobs available. And you have to take jobs that undervalue you, and that puts you in situations where you're not protected, and put you in situations where you're massively undervalued and underappreciated by people around you. And you have to be the one to stand up, sometimes in a void, and say, I'm not going to accept this. And if you're in a position where you have bills to pay, and you're not even able to put a roof over your head right nowadays, going and getting a job, picking up a side job, even if it becomes a 40-hour-a-week job, if it's a job with a minimum wage attached to it, it's not going to be enough to even put a roof over your head. And so you do that and you give up music, right? And while you're looking for situations that won't put you in a compromising an instance that might ruin your life, right? You're forced to make all of these decisions that that basically undermine the very value that you have placed forward in the effort that it took for you to do what you do. I don't know. It's a tough situation, right? Like we could both, either of us could sit and just talk like about all of the things for literally hours, but it's at least just important to know and acknowledge, right, for everyone, that this is an issue and it's not getting better. And we have to support each other because no one else will, right?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is like to first of all believe that you deserve to be compensated for your work and for your training. Because if
Absolutely.
you are going out and doing things for free, everyone else is just going to assume that other people are going to do it for free. And that's really hard because I hate talking about money. I wish that I did not have to deal with any money ever at all. And I could just play my trumpet and live my life. But no, I need to eat. Um, so,
Which is
sorry.
shocking to some people, right? Like, oh yeah, you have bills to pay, so you have to think about money. Like, even if we don't do what we do for money, and I really, who does, like, what musician is like, I'm gonna make bank? No, but you have to think about money.
Well, and that brings me to like last week we missed recording because I was sick because I've been sick for over a week now because I
Yeah.
haven't taken a day off of work. First of all, because I'm the only trumpet player here that knows the book and I play all melody. So it's not like I play harmonies or, anything. I mean, everybody in the band is important, but like if I'm not there, people will notice. So I can't, I don't feel like I'm allowed to take a day off. First of all. Second of all, like, yeah, I'm sick, but I can still play my instrument. Like, it's not like I'm singing. I lost my voice for a few days. I still had to talk, and I was just like, hey, everybody, this is what I'm doing. I'm just like, stupid. But it's just so, like, where do you draw the line? Like, where do you say, like, because, like, I have bills to pay too. Like, I need the money. I need the money, and I love what I do, and I don't want to let my colleagues down because I know they need the money too. Because if I can't go, the shows are canceled and they don't get paid either. So there's all of that pressure. So it's is so hard to figure out like where to draw the line because it's so important to take care of yourself. If I had taken one day off last week, maybe I would be better in a day, you know? Who knows? But now it's been drawing out for like a week. I'm on the upswing of it now because you can actually hear me talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hard to
It is
know
hard.
what to do.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm making an assumption. Well, we can test the assumption. I'll ask you the question. When you went to college, do you feel like you were adequately prepared for the challenges, for those types of challenges that you would see? You know, like obviously you were taught to perform and you were taught, you know, how to, you know, present yourself and showmanship and et cetera, right? But were you taught about how to navigate the safety issues that you would have to deal with?
No, when I was so in my undergrad, like we talked about, like it was a very toxic environment. Um, for me and for everyone else, I'm guessing. I can't speak for everyone else, but it was a very toxic environment for me. And I was under the assumption that I needed to spend every waking minute working on my trumpet playing, working on my musicianship, putting something towards that. And that if I wasn't working on it, then I was useless. We were expected to just, you know, if um, nobody could rehearse until midnight, that's when we were going to have rehearsal. They're like, I don't care if you need to have a lunch break, we're going to have a rehearsal instead. And it's like, now that I think about it, I'm like, back then it was normal. It was like, oh yeah, like, why is everyone scheduling, you know, they submit their schedules and they're like, oh, I need to have this time off, you know, like for me to recover. But nobody would give that to us. It'd be like, okay, you wake up, you go to your theory class at 8 a.m., you've got your ensembles all afternoon. Oh, and now we're going to have all of these rehearsals all night because everybody else is in classes. And so we're going to be rehearsing till midnight. And when do you practice? After that.
Yeah.
So it like, the whole thing basically just trained us to burn out and get sick, right? And then once you're sick, you're like, well, I can't miss rehearsal because I'm going to get in trouble. And so then you come to rehearsal, you get everyone else sick, and everyone's miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. The end.
The end.
No. No, it's good that life moves on, right? And we can see these problems and we can hopefully have the foresight to say, okay, cool, this is a problem. We need to fix this, right? So it's not the end.
But it
But
also it comes from the people who are in higher up positions. So people like us
yes.
now, the teachers, advocating for our students, not being like, oh, nobody can rehearse at a reasonable hour. We're going to rehearse at 6 a.m. It's like, no, you need your sleep. You
Yeah.
need to eat food. You
Yeah.
need to rest. You need to not be playing trumpet or thinking about music for a little bit. You have to like take care of yourself. And I feel like the people who came before us, they were in that like the hustle mindset, you know? Where
Yeah.
it's like everything you're doing, you're working towards this one end goal. But it's like, what is the point of reaching that one end goal if you're broken and depressed and miserable by the time you reach it? Like, what exactly are you trying to get out of it?
Yeah. What is the cost? And is your desired goal more important than the cost that it takes to get there? Yeah, absolutely. That's one of those things, man. It comes out to, well, first of all, I'm glad that you mentioned um that, you know, people who are in those positions where they are um, leading students to become professionals in whatever it is, whether it's your field, whether it's music, whether it's, you know, anything else, but especially for, you know, people who are teaching in colleges. And, you know, it is really, it's really kind of up to us to build that environment that's conducive to health, not just growth, right? And that's one thing I'll say. You know, this generation, the millennial generation, to be specific, who is you know, taking over the jobs across the country and across the world. I guess I'm in America, so I see what happens in America, and unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, sometimes it can be a bit of a bubble. But what I do know is my colleagues are out there and they are killing it in this area, right? Showing people their worth, making sure that they feel safe in their studios, etc. And that's not to say that that our teachers weren't like that. of course, there are plenty of teachers that were like that, but it's something that in today's day and age, as we need to be cognizant of the fact that the world changes rapidly, right? Like by the hour, let alone by the year or by the decade or by the generation, right? And there are a plethora of issues and concerns that we deal with today that we didn't deal with even 5 years ago, let alone 20, 30, or 40 years ago. So it's important to always be constantly evaluating and reevaluating the situations. What overall is the cost of doing what we do, right? I was taught. Now, I will say this as a disclaimer. My teachers, I got super lucky with both the schools and the teachers at those schools, right? And when I talk about this, I mean my applied lessons professors, I mean my college professors, like my, any full-time professor that I ever met, teachers who are applied professors in other instruments, etc. I just got a really lucky, great crop of individuals who understood these things and who acted with compassion, etc. And had that perspective. And they were out constantly touring and performing, so they understood how the climate was changing, right? But we would go through this situation where, well, okay, we certainly have this. You mentioned the hustle, mindset and culture in music, and where it's just kind of normal, right? We're kind of indoctrinated into it immediately, right? Like, here is your convocation course, it's 0 credits. Here's your master class. If you're lucky, it's 1 credit, right? And a lot of schools, it's 0 credits. It comes with your applied lessons. You're required to be here and do all these things. Depending on what school you're in, that master class could be 2 hours, and it could be during dinner time on a Wednesday or on a Monday or whatever the case may be, right? So you're not eating dinner, you're with a bunch of trumpet players or a bunch of brass players, and you're talking about auditions or you're talking about whatever, right? These are all great things to talk about, but not at the sacrifice of your basic needs, right? And then you get together, and this is a very normal thing for still today for music majors, right? You get up in the morning, and I teach a music theory and oral skills class this upcoming semester at 8 a.m., right? So they're going to be meeting with me at 8 a.m. And then after that, they've got another class or another rehearsal or whatever the case may be, right? And they've got another class and another class and another one, right? And because you deal with, sometimes as many as 8 or 9 different classes, because they're 1 or 2 credit hours worth of classes, you really do have a schedule that takes you straight through the day, all day. So really from day one, the moment you step foot on the campus, you're taught to undervalue yourself, right? Because credit hours are associated with money, they're associated with tuition. And so we're massively inflating that from the start, which is a problem from the start. And then we send our students out into the world and we expect them to know how to properly value themselves when we haven't valued them from day one.
Yeah.
Rant Marcus is here. We're doing this. We're here, but we're doing this, and you're in a situation where, yes, you're required to practice, and some people are like 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. You have to do that in the studio if you want any chance of being successful. And we go through this, and the way that it was, a couple decades ago, if you get a doctorate, you're putting yourself above the rest, right? You're putting yourself above the competition. You're the one who's gone the extra mile. In 2023, right? And hopefully maybe there's a pendulum swing in the future. So we can go back and like listen to this conversation and maybe hopefully be like, great, things have changed. But in 2023, that field is so saturated that really you have to get a doctorate just to be noticed. And there's no guarantee you'll even be noticed, let alone be valued, right? And so that's one of those things, I mean, we see, and it comes from a lot of things, right? But it comes from this sort of, if you want to, it comes from a good place, right? It comes from, if you want to be successful in your craft, then you ought to do everything in your power to make sure that you are the best that you can be, so that you are an undeniable, obvious fit, right? But at some point, just like any field, in every field, if you have a host of people doing the same thing, right, putting their all into it, then your all stops becoming the above and beyond, and it becomes the expectation. It becomes the norm. And if you're not giving your all, you don't have any chance. Sometimes you can't give your all, right? We talked a little bit about, like, and previously, if you wake up and 70% is all you can give, and you give 70%, you give in 100%, right? And that's something that's valid, and we should be we should be celebrating that you're willing to give your all even in tough times, right? But there is that underlying pressure sometimes when you look at the environment around you, that if you're giving 70%, you might feel like you're losing 30% and you're behind, and that you have to somehow pull it out of you when you don't have it in you to pull. Um, it's very dangerous. It pulls away from our mental health, and again our safety, etc. And we do it all to be in a craft that is not properly valued, right? So we need to be sure that we have to also advocate ourselves to make sure that we are being properly valued, and we need to be able to get together and work together and make sure that we are keeping each other safe, because there's no guarantee that we'll be kept safe from anyone else, right? So anyway, I went on this. I went a little bit sidetracked. I was talking about my college experience, right? It was sort of an understanding. We got a lot of guest artists who came in as well, who would tell us this, that good enough isn't good enough, right? And that is that is a sentiment with strongly positive implications. But unfortunately, we're getting closer and closer into a climate where that is something we can't really teach our students. We have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, yes, try your absolute best, give your absolute all, but do not give more than you have to give, right? Because that's where we are right now, right? We're in a position where we feel like everything that you give isn't enough, and you have to figure out how to give more, right? You have to figure out how to go through your 8 or 9 different classes throughout the day, and the only time you have to eat is also the only time you have to rehearse. So you have to get together to rehearse, and it's not an option, right? Being in a chamber ensemble for many schools is not an option. It's a part of your degree, right? So you're getting together in your chamber ensemble and you're saying, all right, cool, the only time that we're all free is Wednesday at noon. Well, that's the only time we have lunch. Well, we're not having lunch, right? Or that times you don't even have that time free. The only time you have is 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night, midnight, right? And then, like you're saying, sometimes you have that and you go through the entire day. And man, I've only put together 1 hour of practice, and my teacher or my students or my environment wants me to put 3 hours of practice in, or 4 hours of practice in. I guess I'm here until 3 a.m. Oh, and by the way, my 8 a.m. class still happens the next morning. So if I'm lucky, I'm going to get about 3.5 hours of sleep and go on my way, right? And we're supposed to somehow sustain this? Not likely. Not likely. Yeah. So we need to be very cognizant of the fact that we are not putting ourselves up for success if we try to go along those practices, right? It's not a safe thing to do. It's not a smart thing to do. It's not a sustainable thing to do. And in this economy, as we've put all of those, as we've spread every second of our lives out thin to dry, and then you graduate with mountainous debt, and inflation is through the roof, then you go and you look for a job, even if you get a job fresh out of college. Look, full disclosure, I got a job fresh out of college. It was not enough to pay my bills. They weren't quote unquote undervaluing me per se, right? It was an adjunct position. It was a really great position, for a lot of reasons. I was really grateful for it, but it wasn't enough to even take care of my rent because it was a part-time position by nature of an adjunct, right? And it's accepted that that's what you do, right? When you first start, is you get the job, the part-time job, and you work your way up to a full-time job. But what do you do? What do you do when you can't pay your bills? You can't focus. You want to focus on your students, right? I'm now speaking personally. I wanted to give 120% to my students, right? But I couldn't even give 80% to my students because I had to figure out how to make out more than half of my expenses so I can take care of my income, or not my income, but my bills, right? And that's what everyone's dealing with.
And the thing is like, everyone tells you, I was under the impression that, you graduate with a doctorate, you're going to get a college teaching job. That was my impression. And everybody around me was doing that. People who I went to school with, they were getting college teaching jobs while they were still in the last year of their doctorate. And I'm like, cool, that's going to be me. No, I do not have a college teaching job. I love what I do right now. I absolutely love it. My goal was to be a college professor. And the only way that they would hire me to be a college professor is if I have college teaching experience. So, and TA experience doesn't count. I've taught college classes. I've taught college trumpet lessons. But because I was not labeled as a professor and I was just a teaching assistant or a graduate assistant, that doesn't count on the resume, which, everyone makes it out to be such an important thing when they're recruiting. They're like, oh, you'll get a grad TA. Like, you'll be able to like teach classes and it'll look so good on your resume. But when you're going through the application process, like they don't care.
Yeah.
That's not what they're looking for. And it's really interesting to see, like, so all of the people who are a little bit older than me, like, I'm thinking particularly of like Jacqueline Langford and Nicole Gelati,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Like
Like,
amazing people.
they're so great, and I'm so happy to see them moving up in the world. But it's like, who knows how long it took them to get their entry to that college teaching world, and now they're finally moving into like where they want to be. And like, you have to put so many years in before you can actually like get to where you want to go. And I'm so limited because my end goal is to be in LA. So finding jobs in LA, first of all, I mean, they're gonna get people like Jens and Tom Hooten to be teaching at their colleges,
Yeah.
like, so it's just so difficult. And a lot of the times they don't tell you what options you have. I had no idea that playing in a theme park was an option, and we get paid good money. Like, it's a good gig. We get housing provided for us. We get to work. We get to play our instruments. Like, it's great, and I love it.
Yeah.
But I didn't ever think that I would be doing that like 8 years ago, 9 years ago when I started college.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned Tom and Jens, phenomenal trumpet players, right? They're great. They're great trumpet players. This is part of why we have a saturated field, right? Because all of us look at trumpet players like Jens, like Tom, like Ryan Anthony. We miss him so much. Gosh, what an incredible player. But and then our teachers like with Rudd, Joey Total, Rex Richardson, et cetera, all these people who are amazing, incredible teachers and performers, right? Amy McCabe, Mary Bowden. I mean, the list goes on, right? It's just these huge lists of individuals who are just killing it, right? At the top of their craft. No one looks at the, entry level area and says, that's my end goal, right? We look at the top and we say, that's my end goal. We look at Tom Hooten. If you want to be an orchestra player, you look at Tom Hooten. You look at Chris Martin. You look at Phil Smith's career, right? And et cetera. And you go, that's my goal. That's what I'm going towards, right? And I mentioned this in previous master classes, that I've given in various areas. Most recently, I think NTC was the most recent one. But there's only one Tom Hooten, right? And it's not to say like you'll never be as good a trumpet player. It's just saying there is only one human being with the exact experiences in the exact time period as him. And so, working towards a quote unquote Tom Hooten standard might be an unrealistic thing for you to do. And by might, I mean it is an unrealistic thing for you to do because it is a different time and you have different areas. And even if you get yourself to that high level of trumpet, everyone around you is trying to do the same thing. Being the way that he is now something that is an expectation, right? He got to where he was because he was unique in that he was able to do what no one else did. So if everyone else tries to do what he does, then everyone's able to do it, right? When you take it to its logical conclusion. So you have to be something different. I hesitate to say you have to be something more. We're not saying you have to be better, right? But you have to be something that's relevant to you. But unfortunately, we run into those things. And that's exactly the same reason why getting a doctorate has lost so much of its value, even though it's so much more expensive today, is because, yes, absolutely, 5 years ago, actually, maybe not even 5 years ago, but certainly 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you get a doctorate and you have a pretty darn good chance that you're going to get a job at a college, or you're going to get a job, wherever you want. And we can take it into the symphony side of things as well. I mean, if you study your instrument long enough and you took enough auditions, you would get a job. But even then, I mean, symphony is kind of a different deal because even then it was extremely rare, right? But now that we have fewer positions available and people are keeping them for longer and those positions are being underpaid, right? It's getting harder and harder and harder. Nothing is getting easier, right? In the job field, it's all getting harder, especially for musicians. But we're in the situation now where it just isn't enough. So when you go and you take your in the economy where tuition is growing astronomically and minimum wage isn't, right? And the economy is not working to catch up with it, and that, you know, housing and everything, like, right, we're in a very tough position right now financially as a you know, as a world, but especially the United States as a country coming off of the pandemic and everything that we had to do just in order to get people to be healthy, right? And we're dealing with an economy that is on the heels of that, which means everything's more expensive. Everything that you do, the time that you give is less valuable. And notwithstanding it being amplified by what we're doing in the music world, where yes, everyone has a doctoral degree. So what exactly makes you special, right? If that was your claim to fame, right? If that was the, okay, cool, I have an experience with a doctoral degree, now I'm able to go out and be marketable. And for a rude awakening, you may have been taught that that was the truth, because maybe it was the truth in the past, but it's not the truth anymore. And being able to understand your true value, and that it comes far beyond a piece of paper, right? That's what we're talking about, an extremely expensive piece of paper. And if you look at your expenses, notwithstanding the fact that hopefully you got a good amount of scholarship money, or you paid some things off fresh out of college or whatever, you go through all of your expenses, assuming that you didn't pay them all up front. And at a minimum of $250,000 is what we're being asked to spend, right, on these degrees. Again, to go out and get exposure, right? Go out and play at a local church, or play at a you know, a baseball you know, event, or, you know, to play a national anthem, right? And all these things, like, you know, we'll buy you dinner, you know. And nothing against, I mean, like, I hesitate even to say, you know, to talk about specific institutions like you know, churches or like junior league, you know, and whatnot. It's a budget thing, right? They're not like, we hate musicians. They're like, oh, we don't have the money, and we've been trained, right, that musicians are willing to work for free. But we can't be willing to work for free anymore. We never really should have been willing to work for free. But certainly in an economy, right, again, where it's so difficult just to put a roof over your head, and when you do find something that puts a roof over your head, you're placed in an unsafe and compromising situation where you feel like you have no choice. You know, we cannot allow ourselves to be in that place, and to be okay with it, right? It's it's a little bit of a rant ridden like situation, right? We could just sit and talk really in circles about how difficult it is, because it really is. But I think it's important, like we talked about mental health, right? And previously when we met, it's so important for us to be able to understand that we have to be the ones to take care of ourselves. That even if the world doesn't understand, and even if the entire world is against you, which ultimately is not the case, right? The whole world is not against you. But even if it was, you would need in today's day and age to be resilient enough and to have the strength to understand that what you do carries value, and who you are, more importantly, carries value. And we are the ones who need to take the action in order to make sure that we're making our environments more safe, that we are being valued more for our crafts, and that we don't fall into the traps of trying to put ourselves in positions where we make investments towards things that are no longer valued in our current state of mind, in our current state of the world, so that we're then able to use that time and that investing power, right, to build our career in the way that we need to. You might argue that, well, it's so and so who put me in this position. You know, it's and a lot of people like to say, oh, those darn boomers, right? Oh my goodness, I can't believe that they screwed us over. You know, the reality is, like, maybe some of them did, right? The people who did, do you think they're going to take full responsibility to change, you know, to fix your situation? Their situation's fine, right? They're not the ones who have a fire under their butt. It's us, right? And so the reality is, even if it isn't our fault, we have to take the responsibility to make it better. And unfair, maybe, but it kind of is what it is, right?
Yeah, I think I had a few things that I wanted to say before I had to
Yeah.
cough my lungs out. Um, Let me process. Okay, one thing I wanted to mention. I think that all professors, anyone in a teaching position should have psychology experience and should understand like power dynamics and all of that, because that is a huge part of what we do in music. Second of all, like the people who are teaching us and like the people who told me like you have to get a doctorate in order to get a job, like that's what worked for them. So they are helping you. They're helping you in the best way they know how. But
Yes.
the world is completely different now, and they are old. And they they don't know, they don't understand, and they don't experience it. And so it's really hard for people, especially I find like the older generation, it's harder for them to be um like understanding and like put themselves in your shoes because they had their own hardships that we don't
Yeah.
experience. So there's like that divide. Um, okay, two other things. What else did I want to say? I wanted to say that everyone thinks that America is the best place to go and get a music education. It is the most expensive. It is the most like hustle environment ever. Go to Canada. Go to Canada and get an education experience. International students, $10,000 for a year. International students.
I'm
Go to
glad that
Europe.
I'm glad that you as a Canadian said that, because I've been trying to tell people that all the time. It's like, yeah, don't do it here.
Like
Yeah.
everyone thinks that to make it, you have to go to school and you have to, build your career in America. But so many people have gone elsewhere, got their training elsewhere, like where it's more affordable. And also you get so much more like world experience and cultural experience and make so many connections internationally that it's really cool. And it's scary. It's really scary. Before COVID hit, my plan was to go to Vienna for a year and study there. And then COVID hit and
Yeah.
I couldn't leave the country. So I was like, well, I guess I'm starting my doctorate. And
Oh
that's
boy.
just sort of what happened.
Yeah.
But getting those experiences, like, and yes, those are experiences that you're going to be getting, but they're going to be just as valuable as the ones that you're going to be getting here, if not more valuable. And for the education, you're going to be paying less, which is great. We don't want to be in debt. We don't
Yeah.
want to be in debt at all. And then the last thing that I wanted to finish off with is we talked about sometime a few weeks ago. I don't know when. Every day's a blur. But the power of not so much positive thinking, but how negative thinking can really get in the way of our performance. And it gets in the way of our life as well, because our brain doesn't understand positives or negatives, right? We think something, and our brain's like, oh, this is how it is.
Mhm.
So I was on I've been on TikTok for a while, and there is this thing going around called like the lucky girl syndrome, where it's like something happens. Maybe it's not what you wanted to do,
Yeah.
what you wanted to happen. And in your mind, you spin it in a way that's more positive than negative. And then more positive things start coming out of it. If
Yeah.
if you start thinking and like affirming and manifesting all of these negative things, first of all, your perception of everything is going to be more negative, which is going to drag you down. But so we want to get things into this more like positive mindset. And the thing that they were saying on TikTok is that everything works out for me. Everything works out for me. No matter what, like, you know, if I don't know exactly which way it's going, it's going to work out. It's kind of like how I felt about getting this job. I was going to ITG anyways. I was offered this job. Wow, it's in Minneapolis. I'm going to be in Minneapolis already. The job is providing me housing, so I don't have to stay at a super expensive hotel for ITG. Wow, everything works out for me.
Yeah.
Then um, Nancy Taylor recommended me for a presentation at Schmidt Music in Minneapolis because I was going to be there. Everything works out for me. So I'm getting, all of these things, and it works out perfectly because I recently, I don't know if I mentioned to you, I applied for a job. I got an interview, I got the job. They wanted me to start in a few weeks. And I was like, hey, I can't end this contract because like I signed it. And
Yeah.
they're like, okay, you can start after your contract. Everything works out for me. So I'm going to
Amazing. That's
finish this
awesome.
contract and I'm going to drive 2 days to LA where I'm going to start a new job. I have no idea how long it's going. They told me it's a temporary position. They don't know when it's going to end. Um, but my goal is to be in LA to find work, to establish myself. So everything is working out for me. I'm getting to where I need to be, but it's not necessarily the path that I thought I was going to take.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's one thing that is constant, right? Like no musician gets the exact path that they're looking to take, right? Even if it's like I wanted to be a symphony orchestra musician and I got the job, right? It's even if you get exactly what you wanted where you did, right? The experience when you get there is nothing like what you had thought. But certainly, and for many of us, the majority of us, the path to getting to where you want to go is nothing like what you thought it would. And by the time you get there, sometimes you stop wanting to go where you thought you wanted to go, and you realize that where you are or that where you're currently going is even better than what you ever could have imagined, right? I think it would be a great thing to talk about next time about mindset training, right? Because today is kind of just like a rant, like a hey, listen, it is very difficult. It is very difficult to be a musician, right? In case you didn't know, there are a lot of issues that we go through as a musician every day, right? And it's kind of good, just kind of like I mean, you and I are basically sitting here venting, right? It was like, oh my gosh, like this is hard, right? But we're here because we love it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I know that you're like this, not not only because you literally just mentioned it, right? But I just know who you are as a person, right? That you understand the importance of mindset, right? And when you put yourself in a position to succeed, a lot of that is mental. You get up in the morning and you say, okay, I acknowledge my situation. Life is tough. Things are, I'm having these challenges, etc., whatever the case may be. But I know that this will work out. These are my dreams. These are the goals that I'm looking forward towards achieving. And these are the steps that I'm going to take. And I'm going to keep my eyes and my ears open for all the opportunities that help me to sustain that and to build myself closer to whatever my dream is. When we talk about mindset, this is really, it needs to be a whole episode when we talk about mindset. But I like to tell my students all the time, we have a sneak peek. I like to tell my students, especially I'm starting to teach more and more high school students again, which was something that wasn't super. I lost all my high school students during the pandemic, right? I don't think I ever put that on camera. I haven't said that out loud, so it's out there. People know it's public now. It was really difficult. So it's been a few years since I've had the opportunity to do that. But when you pick up, the high school students, especially the ones who decide they want to major in music, boy, the passion is so bright, and it's like you feel like nothing can extinguish that flame. And ideally, nothing ever does extinguish that flame. But I like to tell those students about just how important it is to make sure that they have that mindset that they are going to achieve their goals, right? Not to say like, well, I'm here and everyone else is here, but rather saying, okay, what are the goals? What is my desired state of being, right? And then to act as though you have already achieved those things, right? So not coming about with a state of arrogance, right? You're not saying, well, I'm the greatest in the world. I have this, I've done these things, right? Not like that, but more so that you think to yourself, you visualize yourself, how would you walk, right? You're asking yourself, how would you talk? How would you be? How would you treat others? What types of things would you do in the practice room? What are the standards you hold yourself as a performer? If you are, let's just say your goal was to be the next principal trumpet player of the Dallas Symphony, right? Um, if you were in that position, how would you play? What are the types of things you would do, right? Who would your students be? Who would your ideal students be if you're teaching on the side, right? What types of traveling gigs would you be looking for? What are the types of things you'd be doing? And then do that today. Do that now. Treat those people the way that you would treat them when you're at your best, when you're living your dream, right? And when you're thinking to yourself, boy, this is an amazing and incredible life and experience, and I love everything about this. How do you feel when you're in that position? That's how you will treat everyone around you and everything that you do. And then you literally attract that into your life, because when you actually get that job, that position, that dream, you've already prepared yourself for it because of the mindset you've put yourself there.
Yeah.
Anyway, sneak preview. We should break down mindset. We should break down
Absolutely.
psychology, human development, and manifestation, and all of those things. We should devote that to an episode. So
I would
we'll
love
do
to
it.
do that. Yeah. And I'm talking, when I was talking about like positive things and like, everything works out for me, it doesn't have to be big things.
Absolutely, yeah,
It could be like the train didn't block me on my way to work.
yeah,
Everything works out. And even if the train does block me, I'd be like, oh, look, I have a few minutes to just sit and reflect, or I have a few minutes to just sit here and be present, because we're always rushing from one thing to the next. And a lot of the time we don't give our time. A lot of the times we don't give ourselves the time or the grace to like just be. So, the lucky girl syndrome, lucky person syndrome, like it doesn't have to be for big things. It can be for little things. It could be like, oh my gosh, the ice cream machine at McDonald's wasn't broken today.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
exactly. It's not toxic positivity, right? It's not, ignoring your plights. It's being able to see that there are beauties in the world, and you can use them to give you energy to tackle the difficult things in life, right? But yeah, that is it's a very important thing to kind of just make sure that we're understanding that.
my colleagues are here. I should go.
Nice. I hope you have fun.
I
Have a great
will.
day.
Thank you. You too. It was
Yeah,
nice to let out some stress.
yeah, absolutely. Now it's gone, right? Now it's going to be a great day.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's so important to like not bottle things up, but and it's not
Absolutely.
bad to complain. You just let it out, you write
Absolutely.
it down, you let it out, complain with a friend, and it's like, oh, I feel lighter now. Now I can go about my day and I'm not being weighed down.
Absolutely. That's important, right? Like we should never ever 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 have to bottle things up and feel like we're dealing with things on our own. That's never something that should be a reality. Maybe we are a mental health and mindset podcast more than a content creation podcast. I'm okay with that.
I'm fine with all of it. I feel like with content creation, like mental health, performance, uh, manifestation, I feel like all of that comes together because
Yeah.
as content creators, like we are still performers, right?
Yes,
This is
absolutely.
all stuff that like we all have to deal with as well.
Don't forget to stay up to date with us on social media. You can find us on YouTube at Chat TPT and individually on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Threads at TPT Solo and at MS Grant Music. We love hearing from you and staying connected with our amazing music community. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it valuable, please consider sharing it with your fellow trumpet players and music enthusiasts. Your support helps us grow and reach even more people. Please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. It would mean the world to us. Your reviews help others discover our show, and we're always eager to hear your feedback. Thanks for tuning in and being part of the Chat TPT family. We'll be back soon with more inspiring conversations and valuable insights. Until next time, keep playing those beautiful notes and stay connected.